Good afternoon, Michael.
Good afternoon. Good to be here.
Welcome to Michael Wood, Member of Parliament from Mount Roskill, to Indian Newslink office. Michael, it's always a pleasure to have you with us. I suppose it's the appropriate time because you've just launched your campaign, or you're doing your door knocking and visiting your constituents in the Mount Roskill electorate. Tell us what is the feeling of the people in your electorate, and how often are you going around door knocking?
Yes, we are at that stage of the campaign where we're all getting onto the ground, talking with as many people as possible, knocking on doors, making phone calls, and talking to people about the election, which is less than 3 months away now. It's always been really important for me that you do as much of that as possible face to face. That was one of the things that Phil Goff always imparted to me, that politics is local for people. You can communicate in many different ways, but as a local MP, being there, talking to people on their doorsteps, at the shops, on the streets, that's the heart of our local democracy. So I try and maximise that as much as possible. You ask, what's the feeling on the ground? My feeling is that we're heading into what will probably be quite a tight election.
Yep.
That people are faced with a number of challenges at the moment. We know that the cost of living, for example, has made things quite challenging for many households.
Right.
And I would say that's the number one issue when I talk to people. They want to hear what our plans and our policies are for supporting them and their families. People don't know that these problems are complex, that some of them are caused by the long-range impacts of COVID-19, the war in Ukraine, but they want to know what we're going to do to help them and their families at what is a challenging time. And so for Labor and for me, that's talking about the experience that we've got leading the country through difficult times, the practical things that we're doing to assist families with some of those extra costs. And we'll keep working on that and presenting new policies in the time to come.
One of the advantages that your electorate people, your constituents have, is the proximity that they have to you as their Member of Parliament. You're with them because you travel in public transport, you go by bicycle, you walk on the street and keep in touch with the constituents. What do they say in Mount Roskill? What are the issues that confront them apart from cost of living, which is a worldwide phenomenon? A lot of people are feeling the pinch of various factors that have contributed to the rising costs. But what about issues like public health? What about issues like the failing children in school, the education system? Some of these, which could be perhaps peculiar to New Zealand, what are the people saying to you?
I think this is a very important set of issues as well, because for most ordinary people, you do rely on there being good, accessible, affordable public services for you and your family, whether it's health, education, a decent transport system. These are the basics of being able to get about your life and do the things that you need to do. And so yes, these issues do come up as well. And you mentioned healthcare in particular. I would say that is certainly one that people do talk about a lot.
Yep.
People need to know that if something goes wrong with their health or the health of their loved ones, that they'll be able to access good quality healthcare at the hospital in their community. People need to know that if one of their kids gets sick, that it's going to be reasonably easy and affordable to get to a local doctor and to get the medications that you need. So that's why, for example, it was really important for us in the budget to take the $5 prescription charge away. And that means that people don't need to worry about the cost of getting medicines from their local pharmacy. So I think these sorts of issues are important. People do talk about healthcare. They do want to know that we're investing in their local schools. Actually, just this morning, I've been out to one of the schools in my electorate, Wesley Primary School, where our government has funded the complete rebuild of that school to increase the quality of their classrooms, but also to increase the capacity of the school so that we keep up with the housing growth in our community. And this will be really important. Labor has been investing in those public services. On the other hand, we have National and ACT who are saying they're going to make big tax cuts. Well, you can't do big tax cuts and continue to invest in public services. You actually need to make a choice between those two things, and we'll support the public services that most New Zealand families rely upon.
Michael, people are telling us that whilst the removal of this $5 prescription fee is some kind of a relief, but it doesn't cover everyone. What they say is that they're more concerned about the long queues in hospitals, the immediate care which they can't access, and the long waiting list that they have for some of the critical services that they require or attention they require. Um, do you think the Labour government could have done better in terms of addressing those issues? Because this has been long standing. We had this complaint even during the time when National was in government for 9 years. But according to people, the service is not improved. Do you agree, or do you have a solution for that?
Well, this is a really important issue, and there's no doubt that there have been long-standing underinvestments in the health system that have meant that we sometimes have had these delays for people getting the treatment that they need. This was a problem we inherited. We've done a huge amount in this area. So right now you can go to every single major hospital in Auckland, for example,
Yep.
and you will see that there is a major building program happening at every single one of those hospitals
Right.
to create more surgical space, more capacity for medical professionals to treat people, to be able to speed up the way in which we process things. Now, you don't upgrade hospitals with major capital works overnight. It does take some time to get that work underway, but we have been making those investments. And again, I'll draw the contrast very specifically here. There were 2 years towards the end of National's time in government where they put $0 of capital investment into the health system.
Yeah.
Every single year we have been making those investments to improve the facilities. The other major challenge has clearly been around workforce, where we have at times struggled to get enough people working in the system to deliver the services that we want to get to people. Now, a part of that was the COVID impact. Closed borders, the international shortage of medical professionals has been very challenging for us here in New Zealand, but also in other countries. I do think we are now making headway on that. We're getting very significant numbers of people coming through our immigration system, and the government is also funding more places to domestically train people to get into the health workforce as well. So I think there have been a couple of major issues there, but we are now making progress on those. And again, this does come back to the core question that everyone will rightly put to political parties this election. Okay, here's a problem.
Yep.
Here's something we need to improve. What will you do about it?
Yeah.
And you cannot fix that problem, you cannot make it better if you underfund the health system. And the opposition who are promising big tax cuts can't promise that and at the same time commit to putting the resources into health and education that our families need. And that is our track record as a government.
So what you're saying is that you're putting in the infrastructure in place, but what about people to man those services?
Yeah.
Health professionals, you need nurses, you need doctors, you need surgeons. How, as the immigration minister, you opened up the system, but are we attracting people as much as we should be?
Yes, I think we're making progress there. Clearly there is more to do. We've been seeing extremely strong numbers coming through our borders now that the immigration system is reopened, and as you'll be aware, I did announce changes at the end of last year to put virtually all of those health roles on the straight to residency green list, both the clinical roles but also what we call the allied health roles. So nearly anyone who wants to come into New Zealand to work in the health system can now get a straight to residency offer, and we're seeing very strong numbers beginning to come through there. But it is also about what you're doing domestically. And so one of the things that our government has recognised is that if you want to not just attract people, but retain them in the health system, you need to make sure that you've got good pay and career pathways for people. So we've recently announced, for example, a number of major settlements, including pay equity settlements in the health sector, that are making a huge difference to the remuneration, for example, of most of our nurses in the health system. Increases of nearly 40 to 50% over the time that we have been in office.
Right.
And in the longer term, that is going to mean that we will keep more of those people in the system in order to make sure that the workforce is stabilised. So, yep, you've got to get them in, but then you've also got to treat them well to make sure that you have enough people in our hospitals and in our clinics.
Are you worried that we are losing a lot of people to Australia?
We certainly are losing some people there. What I would say with that issue is that has always been the case. You can go back over the last 30 years, and apart from the year immediately prior to the lockdown, in every single year there's been a net outflow of people to Australia.
Yeah.
Not a new thing. And in fact, for much of the previous government's terms, the numbers were bigger than they are now. So it's always been a case that happens. Sometimes people go there because it's a bigger country, sometimes the salaries can be higher and there's some different opportunities. But at the same time, we have huge numbers of people who want to come to New Zealand. And quite recently, the OECD has rated our country as the #1 country in the world for attractiveness for skilled workers. So yes, we will lose some people to Australia, but some of them will also come back. Young people often go there to earn a bit of money and have an experience, and then sometimes when they want to settle down, have a family, they'll sometimes come back here.
Can we have some figures on this, if possible, Michael, to counter the argument that there's a massive brain drain or exodus of people to Australia? If you're saying that there's far less now, or comparatively less compared to the National Party days, it could be quite an interesting read. Would it be possible for you to send us some figures?
Yes, absolutely. But broadly speaking, the net outflow at the moment is a little bit above what it was in the 2014 to 2019 period, but actually it's a little bit below what it was in the 2008 to 2013 period. And those figures are freely available.
Okay.
What we are seeing is a very, very strong uptick in the number of people who want to come into New Zealand to work and live here. And of course, we're also seeing some of the effects of the borders opening, and you might have had some young people who perhaps normally would have made their way to Australia over the course of 2 or 3 years,
Right.
sort of suddenly going there in a burst. So I think you're seeing a little bit of that coming through in the figures as well as we return to more normal settings.
Michael, law and order. This has been a major issue, especially with the Indian community. Those who are running retail shops, those who are running superettes, some of these vulnerable people who do the graveyard shifts and so on. The accusation is that the Labour Party, the Labour government, has failed to address the law and order issue. What are your people saying, and what is your take on this?
A number of important things to say here. The first is that, for the people who are affected by this, it's a really serious issue. If you're operating a small business and you have suffered one of these attacks, or you're maybe worried that you might experience one, that is very unsettling for you. And I really feel for the people who have borne the impact of them. And if and when that happens in my electorate, I always make the effort to go and meet with the people and offer any support that I can. And it's just unacceptable. Everyone should be able to go to work, operate their business, and feel safe doing that.
Right.
Our party and government has taken this issue seriously, and we have a number of things that are in place here. One of the things I'll just address head on is the accusation we sometimes hear from opposition parties that the sentencing rules are too weak, and that is driving this issue. Well, if that was the case, then that was the case under the previous government as well, because the sentencing laws, until changes that we have recently made, are not any weaker than they have previously been. They have been consistent right through that period. The truth is that when you talk to senior police officers, what they will say is that you do tend to see waves of these kinds of events. And I remember very clearly in 2016, when I was campaigning to be an MP for the first time, we had a pretty similar wave of attacks on small businesses that came in at that time, very sadly. And we got on top of that issue, and we're seeing another wave now. So what are the things that we're doing? Firstly, we are providing direct support to those small businesses in the form of providing financial support for the fog cannons, the bollards, and other security measures so that they can be more protected against these kinds of attacks. Secondly, we are making sure that there are more frontline police officers to deter this kind of crime. We're very proud of the fact that we now have 1,800 new police officers net in the police force under our government. Under National, we actually saw declines in some years. We've continued to invest in the police force. Thirdly, we have been putting resources into what we actually do to break the cycle. So recently we have put in place changes which do address some of the ability to make sure there are consequences for these actions and to try and sort out the lives of these damaged young people who are committing these offences. So there are now new penalties in place so that if parents or older people are encouraging or incentivising young people to participate in these attacks, then those people can be punished themselves. Because sadly, that is some of the evidence, that some of these 12, 13, 14-year-olds are being driven on by older people and are being manipulated and used by them.
Right.
Well, those people now can face a penalty. We're also giving judges the ability to consider it an aggravating factor if these offences are filmed and then put on social media, because that can encourage more offending. And then thirdly, what we are doing is making sure that 12 and 13-year-olds can also go before the youth court if they are involved in these offences. And that gives us the ability to intervene, to make sure there are consequences for those young people, but most importantly to break the cycle. Because quite frankly, if 12 and 13-year-olds are committing these offences, something's going wrong in those homes. And we need to get in there and fix the problems, whether it's mental health problems, drug abuse, absent parents, chronic truancy. You need to get in and fix those. No politician who comes out and beats their chest and says, I'll be tough on this, I guarantee you that won't fix a single thing. You actually need to get in under the hood and fix the problems in these cases. And we know that when we get these programs going with these young people, we have about a 70 or 80% success rate. So that's our approach. Work to prevent these offences in the first place, but also making sure that there are clear consequences in place when they happen.
But would you agree, Michael, that there is more offending now, although you say that there's a wave that comes and goes, but from the public perception is that there is more offending, increased offending now in the past couple of years than ever before?
We're seeing two different things happening. The first is that the overall rate of youth crime has actually continued to decrease. If you look over, and that's not just about this particular government, we've seen over about 20 years now, year on year, the overall rate of young people committing offences has continued to come down. But there is no doubt that in terms of the particular set of offences in terms of retail crime, that has increased. No doubt at all. And that's why we need these steps to be put in place to make sure that we get on top of that problem and begin to drive it down. We have begun to see some better outcomes. So we had a peak in the RAM rating offending happening in late 2022, and we have begun to see that coming down now because of some of the interventions we've put in place. It's still too high. No level of that offending can be acceptable, and we need to keep really focusing on it to make sure we bring it down.
How do you address the charge that the Labour government is too weak to address these issues, that you've not done enough to bring down this wave, and the retailers are feeling less safer than before? Is this happening in your electorate as well?
Well, look, I can accept that for retailers, if you're experiencing these offences or if you know someone who has, it's hugely worrying for you. You're worried about your own safety, maybe that of your staff or family who are working in your business. So I just accept that reality. Our job as a government is then to look at the practical things that you can do to try and make a difference. And that's why those actions that we've put in place, more police, more support for security measures on site for those businesses, more direct action to actually stop those young people offending in the first place. Those are the practical things that we are focusing on. Now, is that a quick fix? Sadly, the answer is no. If we could click our fingers and do one single thing to stop these offences, we'd do it right now. But what is sitting behind these offences are often quite complex social problems, and sadly they do take a little bit of time to get on top of. But those are the practical things that we are doing. And I know if you're a small business and you're worried about this, you want it to be fixed as soon as possible. And the commitment that I can give is that we take it extremely seriously. We have had it, I have seen it in my own electorate, I have seen the effect that it has on people, and we will keep looking at the practical measures that we can put in place. My one plea to people who are thinking about this issue, this election though, is really ask all of us politicians and all of us parties the hard and real questions. What are the things you will actually do that will be effective? Because this issue will be and is becoming a political football. And politicians who stand up on the stage and just say, I'll be the toughest guy in town, tell us what you would actually do. Show us how that would actually make a difference.
Right.
If actually just putting these young people into a youth facility or a boot camp was actually effective, show us the evidence for that. The evidence is that those things don't generally work.
Right.
These are often kids where the parent is paying no attention to them, doesn't know where they are, there's drug abuse in the household, and if you put the kid back in that household after you've punished them, they'll probably end up doing the same thing. So you've actually got to get into those families and fix the complex problems if you want to actually make people safer, and that'll be our focus.
Are you doing it?
Yes, we do have that work underway. So it's that work, as I say, to break the cycle. We know that if you get involved with these young people and their families, we run a number of programs in this area, that we can have quite a high success rate in stopping the reoffending, around about 70 to 80%. We've set up particular programs in Auckland where we get these people and their families before a family court panel who put in place interventions. Through the changes that we've recently made, the 12 and 13-year-olds can receive sentencing through the youth court as well. They can be required to participate in family group conferencing. They can be required, if the victim wants to do it, to have to front up to the victim and hear about the consequences of their actions, which is often a very powerful thing to do as part of restorative justice. So we are determined that there need to be clear consequences for these young people. They need to know that their actions are wrong, but you then actually need to do things that will turn their lives around, not just pretend to be tough and think that fixes it, because actually just saying those things doesn't fix it.
That takes me to the question of gangs. Again, there's a perception that the gang membership and the gang-related crime, organized crime, has largely increased during the term of the Labour government. How do you address that?
We've had a particular set of issues in organised crime in New Zealand, unfortunately, after some of the 501s have been deported from Australia. And that has led in some cases to a greater intensity of gang activity, a greater use of firearms and more sophisticated criminal operations. This has been a really important issue for us to address, and I can't accept any accusation that we have not been focusing on this. We've provided huge resource to police to specifically focus on organised crime. We have made major changes to the law which give the police much stronger powers to go after the gangs where it hurts. And where it hurts them is with what we call their cash, their bikes and their bling. Those are the things that those gangs value, that give them status and that attract people into their criminal operations. So we've given police stronger powers to get in there and to be able to confiscate the bikes, the cash and the bling where there is a reasonable belief that that might have been derived from criminal offending. So we're giving police more powers in these areas. We've given police more powers to go after the gangs where they are conducting intimidating convoys on our public roads to make sure that those public spaces are safe for people and can't be dominated by the gangs. So we've put in place a number again of very practical measures that enable police to target that sort of criminal behaviour. And of course we're also the government that has put in place much more stringent laws around firearms. And so I find it a little bit ironic that the parties of the right wing, particularly the ACT Party, do try and make a big issue of this, because they're the party that has actually opposed us having stronger firearms laws in place. And if we want to ensure public safety, we need to keep firearms out of the hands of these gangs.
National says that it will ban patch members. What do you say to that?
Yeah, well, we have put in place changes which do allow certain facilities, including government agencies, to require people to not wear gang patches in those areas. So we do already have some of those powers in place. Bluntly, the question you've always got to ask when any party proposes to put a law in place is how you would actually enforce it. It isn't entirely clear to me actually how it would be practical to enforce a nationwide ban on wearing patches in any part of society, any more than it would be possible to enforce a law to ban me from wearing a certain badge on my suit any day of the week. So you've actually got to go in and say, well, would this thing make a difference? Is it actually possible to enforce it? And I haven't actually yet heard that from the National Party. What we do believe is that the key thing you've got to go after with the gangs are the ill-gotten financial assets. These are ultimately criminal organisations that conduct criminal offending and build up wealth. That is how they sustain themselves, and that is how they attract people into their organisations. That is why our focus, as I say, has been around those things that they put their money into, that are their status symbols, and how they store their wealth. And we think that's probably the best approach to really be able to get on top of these issues.
So finally, Michael, you can, without me asking you further questions, can you tell our listeners and readers what the Labour government will do if brought back to power on 14th of October, A, in terms of economy, B, in terms of fixing public services like education, health, law and order, and improving the safety of people in general and the retailers in particular?
Yeah.
You can talk. You can tell us and round off the meeting.
Yes, thank you. Well, the Labour Party's core message and the slogan you will have seen this election is that we're in it for you. The Labour Party has always been the party that is there for ordinary people and their families, not just a few at the top, but for the many people in our country who need a government that understands their issues, that will support them through the cost of living challenges that we're facing, and that will really focus on those core public services, good healthcare, good education, that all of our families rely upon. We have a leader in Chris Hipkins who knows how to deal with difficult times, and a government that's proven itself. We've taken our country through the tragedy of March the 15th, through COVID-19 with one of the most successful responses in the world. We know how to support families during difficult times. We'll continue to make those investments, and all of that is at risk if we have a change of government. All of that progress that we have made in terms of investing in health and education, gone under an extreme National or ACT government. All of the progress that we have made in lifting over 70,000 children out of poverty under this government, gone under a National ACT government. All of the focus on looking after the needs of the ordinary people rather than just those at the top, gone under a National ACT government who would give people like me a big tax cut and very little to people who are really struggling with the cost of living. So in all of those areas you can trust a Chris Hipkins Labour-led government to keep a firm hand on the economy. And let's remember this, that after the biggest crisis in 100 years, as we've gone through COVID and cost of living challenges after that, we still are a bigger economy than we were before COVID, and we still have about the lowest unemployment in the world. We still have incomes that are rising faster than the cost of living for most people, and we have a very positive situation in terms of immigration. So while we've been buffeted by international winds, our economy is still performing very strongly under Labour. One of the lowest levels of debt in the entire world. Record investment going into infrastructure. We're now investing about 3 times as much in infrastructure, which is how we build a productive country for future generations, than we were under the previous government. All of those things that we're doing, all of those investments, you cannot do with the National ACT prescription of big tax cuts for the wealthiest New Zealanders. So this election, as I say, we are in it for you. We'll continue to be focused on those bread and butter issues that Chris Hipkins talks about, tackling the cost of living, making sure we have good health and education, and really firmly focusing on those issues of community safety that we know are so important for our families, our businesses and our communities.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for spending time with us, and you can greet the Indian Newslink leaders. And we look forward to meeting you again, on all the very best in your election campaign.
Thank you very much.